my brain is correct. Of course, it's not coming up right on the first. 24. So I'm a year early. Josh Doan, of course, I would have loved to see him stay in Utah and have his day in the sun. With Doan and Iginla, obviously, they were a combination that worked quite well for Team Canada for a few years. But that is what it is, and that series tied up. Oh. And then it's a pair of goals from Alex Newhook and Cole Caulfield. Cole Caulfield's goal coming on the power play. Again, the Habs do a fantastic job of moving the puck on the power play. It just seems that some of their opportunities, like Cole Caulfield's, just walks out of the corner and undresses Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who takes over the net from Alex Lyon for the Sabres. But yeah, as I said, you can't expect to play a period of really good hockey and win in the playoffs. Tage Thompson gets his fourth goal of the playoffs off a weird bounce. Dobesh couldn't corral the puck on the side netting. It eventually does get whacked home. It's just unfortunate. Takes a weird bounce on Dobesh. Would have loved to see that one stay out. Because it did trickle through him from the blue line. Or from outside the blue line. And then the Habs get in penalty troubles once again, and it's Zach Benson from Josh Doan and Tage Thompson. Just a good rebound play, whacking and hacking it off the pads of Dobesh, who has been one of the most impressive goaltenders to watch in the entire playoffs. But that would be it. The Habs could not get closer, and a lot of roughing penalties here in this one. Obviously, in the first period, it was kind of, let's keep control of the game from the refs trying to work through that. But it is getting real physical. And speaking of physical, let's talk about the Golden Knights triumphing over the Anaheim Ducks to even that series. And hey, if you are only watching one series, or rather take the 3-2 lead over the Ducks, that might be the series to watch because it's got speed, it's got skill, and as we saw a little bit later in this one, got a bit of grit to it as well. So at the end of the 10-minute mark, we did see Braden McNabb interfere and absolutely crush Ryan Poehling late. It was assessed to be a 5-minute major and a game misconduct for the high-speed hit on Poehling away from the puck. Poehling did leave the game and did not return. Puck was no longer playable when contact occurred. You have to see the principal point of contact towards the head, snapping it into the glass. I think this will probably see supplemental discipline from the Department of Player Safety as well. It's a late interference, vulnerable player, head into the glass, and the injury outcome. So you kind of ticked off all the boxes that the Department of Player Safety looks at. So you likely be in the 1-2 game range because, hey, it's the playoffs and playoff games matter more. We don't want to decide the outcome of a series because of the Department of Player Safety, which is an absolute sham, in my opinion. But let's also talk about the goals in this game. Because on the power play that was after the hit, Beckett Seneca gets his 5th goal of the playoffs, assist to Cutter Gauthier and Mason McTavish. Just pressure in behind goal, that Gretzky's office area, and Seneca right at the back door to tuck that one home as he snuck his way back out front, beats Carter Hart. Then the Ducks, Pavel Minchikov slashes Mitch Marner. That's not what you want to do with this very lethal Golden Knights power play. Ducks can exit the zone, and it's do-it-himself Pavel Dorofeyev. I think that goal should have been unassisted with the amount of time the Ducks possessed the puck, but I'm not an official stats keeper for the NHL. Hurdle and Eichel get the assists. Good work by Dorofeyev to not let the Ducks get out of the zone. Then Tomash Hurdle scores for the Golden Knights. Just a good face-off play. Brendan Saad gets the initial tip, and eventually it is whacked home by Hurdle. Rasmus Andersson gets his second assist of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Good to see Rasmus getting his points. Say, I still have a soft spot for Ras. Like, I don't think he was the bad guy in that situation. Should the Flames probably have said, yeah, we're moving you in the offseason, gotten a better return? Yeah, probably should have. Can't begrudge them for not making a move themselves. Then the Ducks answer back. It's Owen Zellweger as the Ducks absolutely just flicking the puck around. Assist to Cutter Gauthier and Mason McTavish. But that would only tie the game up. It would go to overtime, and you only need 4 minutes. Vegas, absolute howitzer from the line. And once again, it's the combination of Jack Eichel and Pavel Dorofeyev just left absolutely all alone. Tucks it past Lucas Dostal. And that would be all she wrote. The Vegas Golden Knights now hold that series advantage 3-2. And we have to keep mention and keep watch of this game sheet for the Ducks, because we've kept hearing that Radko Gudas is almost ready to make a return. We've heard it repeatedly throughout this series, so we'll have to see when he does make his return to play, because that could turn this series on its head. Having a big physical defender and somebody who, to be generous, I will say walks the line of being a dirty player. Because, like, you have to think that it's going to be an interesting way to do things to nullify this Vegas threat. Interesting to watch for sure. Some other stories coming out around the NHL, of course, to talk about. The Toronto Maple Leafs, and under new general manager John Shakeup, and I can't remember, what is Matt Sedin's official title? Let's do a quick Google here, because I don't think anyone in chat today knows what his title is. He is the Senior Executive Advisor to Hockey Operations, not the president, but the Senior Executive Advisor. So his advice was, let's pitch Craig Berube into the sun for turning a team that was a perennial playoff contender into the biggest bag of magic beans, what ifs the game has ever potentially seen. But, you know, we don't have the foresight and the knowledge into what went on. You have to think that the new general manager, John Chayka, and Matt's probably had conversations with some of their star players, like like Austin Matthews. I was going to say Mitch Marner, but no, he is down in Vegas doing quite well for himself. You have to think those conversations had happened previously under the previous management squad. But you had to think that this new group wanted to say, hey, what's going on? Can I put my finger on the scale? If I do this, am I going to disappoint the team? Or set off any alarm bells in the biggest media market in Canada? And hey, they eventually do decide to fire Berube. And I kind of looked throughout all of the yammerings of who is going to be the replacement. Obviously, the big name, the big fish that everyone wants to talk to and has allegedly been denied even talking to the Edmonton Oilers is Bruce Cassidy. He is the big fish. He has the Stanley Cup pedigree. He is known for a strong defensive structure, which I don't think is the game Austin Matthews wants to play. But he's a demanding, and he has success everywhere he goes. And several people have immediately made that link. But sometimes the easy to make link isn't the only one. David Carl is the modern progressive option, and he's been really good with Team USA incredible at the NCAA with Denver. He's considered the bright young mind of the NHL. He's really creative tactically, and he has a great reputation with younger guys, and you have to think that'll play in with Austin Matthews. But then your question is, do you want a first-time NHL head coach leading the Toronto Maple Leafs? And hey, they're likely getting a superstar in Gavin McKenna, if that is the way the draft pick goes. Is according to the Athletic, he's not the number one guy according to them. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But regardless of who they picked, is picking a developmental guy what's best for the Leafs? I certainly lean that way. But again, it's a tough hockey market, and if you're bringing in a first-time NHL head coach, might not be the best place to be. And of course, there's Peter Laviolette, like the veteran fallback option that he has been so many times. If you want an immediate authority who has name recognition behind the bench, and hey, John Shakeup might value that experience over experimentation. Yeah, he just wants to experiment with the players before the bringing them in for individual workouts when you're not allowed to do that. But he's kind of been floated around a little bit. Definitely not the front runner, but certainly could be an option. And then we haven't heard anything about John Tortorella and if he will be continuing on with the Vegas Golden Knights. As he was brought in on that short-term deal, and obviously still in the playoffs, so who knows, he could re-sign, but if he's tempted away, maybe he's the guy that bounces back from the Vegas Golden Knights and brings his coaching north of the border. He truly would be the chaos option of all things, because having that personality in that media market, I don't think there would ever be a non-Toronto Maple Leafs bit on Sportsnet for the next however long he would be the coach. And he's got his personality that I'm sure Rogers would love to have in their team. But obviously, who knows if he stays with Vegas after this playoff run? Who knows if he even wants to be a coach long term, because maybe he just took this as a kind of a favor to get Vegas over the line and then go back into retirement and media. These are things I don't have the answer to. And then here is the answer that I think not a lot of people have necessarily talked about. And it's a team that probably wants to avoid controversy, but there is Mitch Love, who is kind of that, he's that former Washington assistant, obviously has had to take this whole year off after some not so great things happened over the personal misconduct, domestic abuse allegations. He's eligible to apply for reinstatement. I think it's a super duper dark horse to even consider him in the running, especially, as I said, in that media market that's already in hot water for bringing in a figure that's deemed to be controversial in John Chayka into that general manager's spot. But like, he keeps getting NHL interviews, and if he and the Maple Leafs believe that Mitch Love could be the secret formula to get this team back together, to allow Austin Matthews to stay in town and continue to develop with the potential young star in Gavin McKenna, you'll have to see, because it is a interesting younger analytical possibility out there. And with that talk, we talked about Toronto winning the draft lottery. We saw Corey Pronman, who released his long list for the 2026 NHL entry draft. And he actually thinks that the 2026 class is below average. It's led by a strong group of defensemen and underwhelming group of forwards in his writing. Um, but also says that the very top lacks premier talent. And he says there's a few goalies in here that can develop into something, but the top group is 5 players, and ultimately the number one spot was nearly a 5-way tie. But as he says, none of them are truly elite generational. And he says he thinks the defensemen are better than those top 2 forwards who the vibe has been around the entire time. So his order of the draft actually went Chase Reeds into Albert Smits, who's been saying Smits is the guy for the longest time. Then Keaton Verhoff into Gavin McKenna and Ivar Stenberg, which, if his read of the prospects is correct and the teams agree with him, would have Caleb Malhotra potentially falling to the Calgary Flames, which I think is really a huge thing for the Calgary Flames, getting that taller center at 6'2". Of course, another left-handed center, which is not what the Flames necessarily want. And of course, he's actually committed to go back to BU for the next year. For the Flames, that's totally fine. You don't need to bump someone even further this year. However, he's using a skill grades of skating, which is average puck skills, above average hockey sense, and above average compete. Compares them to Matty Beniers, which, isn't exactly where I would want things to be. And then, of course, talk about Carson Carroll's in the Flames area of picks. Skating at average, puck skills at average, hockey sense at average, high-end compete, and an above-average shot. Having him in the long term out there with Zayden Parekh, that would just be absolute chaos drafts. Like, just, I'm going to go freewheeling. So you need guys to cover for those high-end offensive level defensemen. But hey, if you have a 2 defenseman power play 1, Zayden Parekh and Carson Carroll's, or hey, Zayden Parekh power play 1, Carson Carroll's power play 2, and then they're playing top line minutes together, I'm not against that necessarily. So that's kind of how things are shaking up in terms of the NHL. Of course, Matthew Barzal did withdraw from the Canadian World Championship roster because of a lingering injury return. Speaking of injury returns, his replacement, however, probably one of the greatest replacements you could get in Sidney Crosby. Of course, everyone knows his recent struggles with injury, but I think anytime Sid is asked to come in and wear the Maple Leaf, I think he's going to do it, and you have to wonder if that affects the captaincy and where that is located. Of course, obviously, it is currently on the phenom out of San Jose, Macklin Celebrini. But if you're bringing Sid in, do you have to just take that C off automatically and pass it over? I certainly think that that is something that will be done, just because it is it's Sidney freaking Crosby. So I don't think you can keep continuing to keep the C on Macklin Celebrini if Crosby is over at the World Championship. So that's just my 2 cents. And there is enough rumors going along around the internet that Evan Bouchard may have played through a concussion during the postseason, and like, the other rumor is there are major blue line changes coming to this Oilers squad. How can there not? Darnell Nurse is an anchor, and Evan Bouchard is a one-way offensive player, doesn't have anything in the defensive zone, in my opinion. And of course, this is probably going to get circled around Edmonton a few times, and I'm probably going to get some interesting comments on why a guy my size is talking about NHL defenseman. But yeah, we can also talk about how there are a few big name rumors or big names that are being floated around in trade conversations. I've heard about Austin Matthews and in Los Angeles connection, potentially. Brady Tkachuk still the fan conversation about, does he belong in Ottawa long term? And then, of course, the Jets and the future of Connor Hellebuck, if they are going to continue to flounder around in the basement for the foreseeable future, is it worth using Connor Hellebuck as an asset? And And of course, there's always a talk about what's going on in the playoffs in terms of injuries, who's playing through what. Really an interesting period of time here, because looking at covers.com, polling obviously day to day with that upper body injury from the hit, the indefinite or the pending return of Radko Guis and Hellison as well for the Ducks. Have to see what's coming there. You have to wonder when Arturi Lehkonen is going to return for the Avs. And and you'll have to see if Eric Sinek, as I said, can return quickly from his lower body injury and what level he'll be at upon that return. But that's all for the NHL today. I do have appointments later today, so this is going to be a bit of a shorter show. So we are going to head to our break. When we return, it will be to discuss what may be the biggest story in soccer, at least on the North American continent, with the upcoming World Cup. We will talk about that all when we return here on the Woodshed Sports Report.
Traveling mountains just to find the loudest seas. We set down by the fire, knowing we could aim higher, but we didn't know that yet. So if you want something to hold on to, gotta find it first. But here I am, 'cause I've been laying under palm trees waiting for the summer, knowing there's nowhere to go. 'Cause I am happy on this island, wanna be my farmland. I don't ever want to leave, I'm in a tropic club. I remember the ocean, memories die out too hard. But we were traveling the mountains just to find the loudest seas. We sat down by the fire, knowing we could aim higher, but we didn't know that yet. So if you want something to hold on to, gotta find it first. But here I am, 'cause I've been laying under palm trees waiting for the summer, knowing there's nowhere to go. 'Cause I am happy on this island, wanna be my farmland. I don't ever want to leave, I'm in a tropic club.
Oh man, the perfect timing for that song to fade out. I'd like to claim that I intended to do that, so I'm going to. But this brings us into what's a more serious topic for Wildcard Wednesday. And that is the current movement going on in Vancouver to hashtag save the Caps, as they are rumored to be on their way out of Vancouver and potentially heading to the hotbed that is Las Vegas. The shining lights could shine so bright, and there's a report that even if this movement continues its momentum, the decision has already been made. But for those of you who are not soccer fans, let's go through a bit of a history of the Vancouver Whitecaps, because they are one of the longest and most storied franchises in the MLS, and actually predate the MLS. Because they were founded in 1973 when the original Vancouver Whitecaps were founded for the North American Soccer League. Of course, the Whitecaps talking both of the white snow of the Snowy Mountains and the white caps of the waves that are just blocks away from BC Place Stadium. So that's why you get, when you look at their crest, it's in our lovely photo, and of course the Save the Caps movement is using. It's got the white caps above for the mountain and the white caps below for the sea. It is one of the best designed logos in professional sports, in my opinion. Club plays its first season at Empire Stadium, and the predecessor to the MLS. So the first franchise goal is scored that year at Empire. And then, of course, in 1978, or in 1975 rather, they move, or wait, incorrect. In 83, they move in to BC Place. But in 76, they make their first playoff appearance, beginning a soccer boom in Vancouver. People like Christine Sinclair, obviously notable for this. And obviously, they're defining moments in club history in the NASL. Vancouver defeated the New York Cosmos, who are the predecessor to the New York Red Bulls. They defeat them in the semifinals, then beat the Tampa Bay Rowdies to win Soccer Bowl 79, which is Vancouver's first North American Pro Sports Championship. Of course, ignoring the CFL for the case of this. The team becomes a cultural phenomenon. Like, attendance is regularly over 30,000. And in 83, as I said, the club moves into BC Place and drew 60,000 fans for its initial match against the Seattle Sounders, which at the time was a Canadian attendance record for soccer. But of course, only a year later, the North American Soccer League collapses financially, and the original Whitecaps followed suit. But the scene would not be without professional soccer long, because in 86, the Vancouver 86ers were founded in 86. We're going to be the 86ers. Compete in the Canadian Soccer League, and US-based leagues kind of bounce around through leagues. And they're strong and successful. And of course, it's an era where the Vancouver 86ers developed players that played on the national team. This is, of course, coming after the Canadian national team's first appearance in the World Cup. However, and the team of club officially rebrands from the 86ers back to the Whitecaps in 2001 because of the long attachment from the community to the initial NASL identity. And then businessman Craig Kerfoot acquires control of the club in 2002 and puts a big focus onto youth development in the area, which obviously for any sports team in North America is the way to success. It really is how teams like Cavalry are able to build, like guys like Victor Laturi coming through the system. Guys like Arabin Peppel, who is now one of the hottest free agents in all of soccer. Um, this model was built by the Whitecaps. Guys like Marco Carducci came through the Whitecaps system. Numerous others who are now in the CPL came through the system. And they were the first people to really invest in Calgary outside of Foothills to bring in training and development to the top level athletes in soccer in Calgary. And then in 2006 and 2008, the Whitecaps win 2 USL, which is the United Soccer League First Division Championships. And they also had a women's team, which was highly successful. And then in 2009, MLS awards Vancouver an MLS expansion franchise along the Portland Timbers. And Don Garber announces the Whitecaps as the league's 17th team. In 2011, the Whitecaps officially joined the MLS and returned to BC Place full time. Of course, got some pretty intense rivals with the teams close to them to the south. The Portland Timbers and the Seattle Sounders. It's the Cascadia Cup, for those of you who don't know. And then in 2015, Vancouver wins its first Canadian championship of the MLS era. Of course, before the CPL, the Canadian championship was a little bit less competitive, but still hard to win. Between 2022 and 2025, the club wins multiple Canadian championships and becomes more competitive in MLS and CONCACAF play. Apologize to you folks. Sneeze snuck up on me. It's spring. It's allergy season. It's gonna happen. Winning multiple Canadian championships despite losing to Cavalry FC in the Canadian Championship with Ali Adnan, or it's not Ali Adnan. What was it Ali Adnan? Yeah, it was Ali Adnan, who was the biggest international player that the Whitecaps had when they lost to Cavalry FC. The $1 million left foot, as he was referred to as. But in 2024, the current ownership announces the club is officially for sale, citing the growing fiscal demands of the MLS and stadium challenges at BC Place. We'll get into that in a bit. In 2025-2026, the team reaches its strongest periods in MLS history on the field. Obviously, Thomas Muller coming to the club is a move that Vancouver made to try to get another investor on board. And obviously, if you know the history, if you watch Canadian soccer, you've seen Alphonso Davies come through this club and become the greatest football player Canada has seen. I think Mr. Owen Hargraves may have a debate on that, but it's truly a argument that you can have. But here's kind of the breakdown of why the Whitecaps are for sale. The current ownership group, which it still includes Greg Kerfoot, Steve Luxo, Jeff Mallett, and former NBA player Steve Nash, have announced that they just don't have the funds to continue the development and broader the ambitions of the team to compete long term. And a lot of that does boil down to BC Place. BC Place is owned by the provincial government, and they've announced they have no plans to sell it to an individual group. So BC Place just doesn't allow them to get any revenue from concessions, premium seating, parking. Like, there are so many things where the money goes to BC's government rather than to entities like the Whitecaps. So compare that to every other team in the MLS currently, where it is privately owned or long leased stadiums to these soccer clubs. And they're one of the few teams now that don't have a soccer specific stadium. In fact, that's now becoming one of the requirements for these entry fees for expansion or relocation is you have a soccer-specific stadium. Of course, obviously, there are teams that are grandfathered in behind that. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to play games at a New Yankee Stadium if the MLS had their thoughts on the club. And let's be real, this is the most expensive era to be an ownership group in the MLS area, like the likes of Lionel Messi and all the other talent, like even Thomas Mueller, despite the fact that he's at the end of his career, those contracts aren't going to get any smaller. So if you are a lower cost organization, you're just not going to be competitive. And they're saying that, hey, we're in a market that's not necessarily supported the Whitecaps in their darkest hours, despite the fans disagreeing. But the costs just go higher and higher. So they're saying we can't continue. And several reports are saying Vancouver ranks near the bottom of MLS in revenue generation, despite the attendance and improving on-field success, and operating at losses of near $10 million annually. I don't know of a lot of people with money who are okay losing $10 million a year through a club despite their success. And hey, they say there's dozens of investors that have investigated whether it is possible to keep the team in Vancouver and have backed out because of the stadium and that revenue situation. That's where relocation rumors, including Las Vegas, have become more prominent. And also, the Whitecaps' long-term BC Place lease has expired. There's been temporary extensions and so many scheduling conflicts. Because, hey, if you're not the primary tenant of a building, and hey, it doesn't seem like BC is overly enthused to let the Whitecaps be that primary tenant, you had to see, in fact, for the Canadian Championship, they'll be playing at Swangard Stadium in Vancouver, which is a great facility. It doesn't have the seating requirements that the Whitecaps would require full time, but they're on temporary extensions. And of course, the city and the Whitecaps have discussed a few places for a new stadium, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But the fact that they'll still need a place to play for the short term, and they'll have to deal with the government of BC to get that done, just adds in so many more hitches into the giddy up, into the get up and go of this. Of course, we have been told, however, that the MLS has told its member clubs to prepare for a Whitecaps Vegas relocation. This coming out today, report from the Canadian Soccer Daily staff. According to Montreal radio host and a former commentator for the MLS, Jeremy Filosa, MLS clubs have been informed to expect an announcement regarding the relocation of the Whitecaps to Vegas. And this is after BC Place is receiving major renovations to host the World Cup. Like, to lose soccer in that city would be so awful. Like, of course, the BC Place just was upgraded, and the expansion roof will be closed for all of the matches. Like, this is a facility that just received $180 million of government money to upgrade it, and more millions to temporarily install grass. Like, the fact that the MLS is already saying it's time to move on, time to move these Whitecaps to Vegas, just to improve the fiscals of the rest of their team's products, like, it's just not, it's a gut punch to the fans, because there are several stadium potentials. We'll start with the one that derailed in the early 2000s. The dream project of Craig Kerfoot was the Gastown Rail Yards being transformed into a stadium. Of course, that was kiboshed due to the fact that it would conflict with Port of Vancouver operations and via rail operations. It's obviously opposed by urban planners and Gastown groups as well. And that's kind of the if only that Whitecaps supporters are looking at now. The other potential option is at the Hastings Park and the Pacific National Exhibition Grounds. That's the current front runner. It's near the Pacific Coliseum, so there's already major sporting and parking in the area. And there is a memoriam of understanding to formally explore a stadium entertainment district here. Reason it's attractive is that it is a city-controlled land with enough space for a modern MLS stadium. But there is currently no SkyTrain station directly adjacent, concerns about transit, and some fans feel that it is too far from the downtown core. It has a lot more land, easier than near the waterfront, but you know what? It just seems to not be the option. Of course, there is the option of staying at BC Place, which already has all of its ducks in a row. But you would require a big concession from the BC Lions, the provincial government. There's so many other shareholders in this that wouldn't want possibly grass year round. They wouldn't want to hand over more of those concession parking, etc., to the Whitecaps. So it's also got some incredibly high operating costs. And hey, that upper deck, they hardly ever open it unless it is Messi coming to town or if it's another big name superstar. The other thought is, do the Whitecaps shack up over at UBC, building a extension to Thunderbird Stadium. However, it has the same issues. It has no rapid transit access. It's far from downtown in the suburbs. And the neighborhood and campus has concerned about crowds and events, so that's certainly a long shot. However, there's recently been talk about moving it fully to the suburbs, potentially to Burnaby, which has less land cost, the challenge of transit, and is the club even Vancouver if it plays out at Burnaby? So your options I would rank as 1A, or 1 and 2 would be building that new stadium at PNE/Hastings Park. The second being figuring out a way to stay at BC Place. And then potentially a revived waterfront concept or Burnaby, with the long shot being UBC Thunderbird Stadium. But a lot of this is motion coming from the fans, coming from groups like the Southsiders. It's the Rain City Brigade, the Curva Collective. Like, there's a lot of supporters unions online, and it's coordinated stadium demonstrations, it's social media campaigns, it's marches to BC Place even on non-game days. And it's like people trying to pressure the ownership group as it is, and both Vancouver and British Columbia governments. Like, it's so tough. Like, they need a longer term lease. They need to figure out a better business model. And like when Donald Garber, the president of the MLS, says the situation is untenable, man, it's gonna be tough for fans to swallow, especially if it's even Garber coming out and saying this isn't going to be the home of the Whitecaps. This is just until we can get a deal done. Temporary things like that aren't often changed back. So, and I am personally of the belief that without Vancouver and the Whitecaps, soccer in Western Canada certainly gets a lot worse. Because as I said, they were the first group before, outside of Foothills, to invest into a way to develop Calgary youth and to bring them in, to build them into professional soccer players. It really hampers the Canadian Championship if the Whitecaps are gone. There's only those two MLS teams out east, and the travel costs for teams out west, especially the BC Premier League, Alberta Premier League, it increased their cost exponentially. but more for those of us who are fans of this sport and what it's building in this country. It chops the head off. It chops the cap off. No matter if you're a fan, I think you can recognize what Vancouver has done for the system across this great country. So hopefully the Whitecaps can find an option that isn't relocating to Vegas. Like of course we heard yesterday of a ownership group that is trying to come up with the funds to keep the Whitecaps in Vancouver, and it is led by a guy who has a lot of hard feelings in Vancouver. Arthur Griffiths, of course, he was the one who sold the Vancouver Grizzlies and had them relocated. So there is some hard feelings. The economics in Vancouver were difficult at the time. A weak Canadian dollar, attendance issues, and older fans still associate him with the reason that the Grizzlies left. But hey, he was the one who is done a lot for Vancouver in its history. He brought the NBA to Vancouver. He built Rogers Arena. He helped lead the 2020 Olympic bid. And local ownership connection matters a lot right now. Like, the focus of Save Our Caps is we don't care who owns the team. It could be Ryan Reynolds coming back home to save soccer in his hometown as it threatens to leave, just like it happened in Wrexham. I don't see that as a future, but if it's Griffiths teaming up with a bunch of local Vancouverites, hey, if he comes in and gives them that hope to not have a Grizzlies 2.0 moment, that would be incredible. Would probably save face for a lot of older fans, but they do still worry about him getting in with an ownership group that values real estate or relocation leverage over actual long-term locality. So, but even for if this group is here, it's the supporters are wanting them for a commitment to keep the club in Vancouver permanently and a continued investment in the building of Canada soccer at its roots. So it's tough. Because can you find a place in Kitsilano? Like, it's so hard. And it sucks. Like, we've seen the Oilers in this province kind of bully their way into a stadium by mentioning, oh, we can go to Houston. Oh, we can go to XYZ. Oh, we'll have conversations with Seattle. I saw from how many fans that were hearing Calgary talk about it. Oh, what would it be without the Battle of Alberta? We're seeing it from fans in the MLS, especially of the Cascadia Cup teams. They're flying the Save the Caps banners, knowing the Cascadia Cup means so much more with the Whitecaps in it. We've heard it with the Flames. Like, I don't think we're far away from where the Flames were before their stadium, where talks were starting to rumble and heat up about relocation and losing the Flames in Calgary. Like, it's tough. It sucks. And I'm hoping that the Caps are saved. Maybe not by hook or by crook and not by any means necessary, but I really think that the Calgary Flames or the Vancouver Whitecaps have with those parallels. And I really, really hope that a solution is found that keeps the Whitecaps in Vancouver. As I said, a shorter show today. Number one, due to the fact that there were less playoff games in the NHL for us to talk about, and the fact I got appointments. I gotta be a real human being here. So thank you for tuning in to the Woodshed Sports Report. Once again, my name is Conrad Wood, and we will see you on Friday for all things Calgary Flames and a little bit more playoff talk. And Fired Up Friday returns on the channel.